Hello everyone, this is Rifat and welcome to this instructional video. The Clemson University 2019 USUDC Adjudication Corps recognizes that many individuals may be coming to nationals this year and have primarily participated in a wide variety of speech, public speaking, and debate formats, including but not limited to Lincoln Douglas, ABDA, World Schools, Policy, etc. This video seeks to standardize expectations from debaters and judges and hopefully clarify any misconceptions when transitioning to the BP debate format. The first section is about winning a BP debate round. Winning teams are most effectively able to persuade an ordinary intelligent voter. This begets two questions: what makes an argument persuasive? And what are the characteristics of an ordinary intelligent voter? Answering the first question, an argument is persuasive insofar as it is logically coherent and it is important or relevant to the debate at hand. Since there are 4 teams in any BP debate round, the greater the extent to which teams are able to demonstrate that their arguments are persuasive to an ordinary intelligent voter, the higher the likelihood that they will be placed favorably among the 4 teams in that round. Answering the second question, an ordinary intelligent voter, simply put, is an ordinary person. That is, they are not a scholar and don't have access to technical knowledge or expert vocabulary. However, they are an intelligent voter. That is to say, even though they may not on face understand a sophisticated concept, as long as an adequate quality of explanation is provided, then that is fair game. So, for instance, if the debate is this house supports free trade, it may not be fair for a team to simply name drop comparative advantage. However, if a team is able to explain what comparative advantage is and how it's relevant, then that's totally fair game for consideration in that round. The second thing on this is that judges should adjudicate the debate that took place, not the debate that they wish had happened in the room. This means it doesn't matter if you yourself would have run an argument or if you had seen an argument being run in a debate or in a similar conversation happening. None of that is relevant. You should forego personal biases, prejudices, political preferences, and strive as much as possible to adopt the ordinary intelligent voter model. In BP, there is no mutually preferred judging. However, if as a judge you feel that you're not able to judge a debater fairly, or as a debater you feel that an adjudicator is not able to judge you fairly, either due to institutional affiliations or personal conflicts, please refer to the tournament scratch policy already published and then inform the CA and TAB teams accordingly. The next section is about prioritization of arguments in BP debate. The first two of this slide are regarding refutation. So for judges, number 1, teams are not expected to respond to literally every single claim made by an opponent. Just because a team drops an argument, that isn't necessarily a problem unless they drop literally the most compelling or the most important arguments in that round. Number 2, for teams, don't treat contributions made by your opponents as a laundry list of claims, all of which need to be responded to. Instead, you should prioritize arguments made by an opponent in terms of how important or how strong they are in that round, and then disproportionately spend more time and effort in responding to the most compelling parts of their case. The third thing on this is that, in general, quality of arguments supersedes quantity of arguments. That is to say, a team that has made 4 but weakly substantiated arguments can easily lose to a team that has made 2 but very well substantiated arguments. That is to say, teams can win against opponents even if they made fewer arguments, because it's far more important to look at the quality of explanation substantiating an argument than it is to merely count the number of claims being made. The next section is about extensions in BP debate. Extension is probably what makes British parliamentary a very unique format of debate. So in British parliamentary debate, closing teams do have the obligation to provide an extension, any new contribution made by a closing team can be considered an extension, regardless of whether or not the team calls it or flags it an extension. Extensions can be new rebuttals, new framework, new links, distinct impacts, or entirely new arguments. How should extensions be judged when comparing teams on the same bench, for example, between opening government and closing government? So, simply because CG has an extension doesn't necessarily mean CG is going to place above OG. What you should do as a judge is identify what the new contributions are from CG and then evaluate the extent to which you find that persuasive in comparison to the contribution made by OG in that round. How should whip extensions be judged if they happen in a debate? Now, whip speakers are the last two speakers from the closing teams of either side, and in general, they can definitely bring in new examples and new rebuttals. However, they should not be providing new substantive contributions in their speech. So, if a whip does do so, which I'm calling a whip extension, how should you judge it? You should simply disregard that material. What you should not do is disregard that material and then again go ahead and dock speaker points because you're doubly punishing them. What you should do in general in a BP debate, if you find a part or a contribution unpersuasive, is you should not take that into account or disregard that part of that contribution. The last section is about evaluating engagement between teams in BP debate. One of the things that makes BP unique is points of information, which basically are 15 seconds of ability to interject a speaker by any speaker on their opposing bench. In general, the way you adjudicate POIs is by treating it as matter. So, for example, if opening government gets a POI from closing, then you identify the POI being given and evaluate it as though you would have evaluated contribution from CO. If a POI is very good, that definitely is a reason for you to be more persuaded in favor of CO. If a POI is not that good or that POI is very heavily answered very well by OG, then that part of that is matter for preferencing OG in the long diagonal. In general, teams should prioritize offensive argumentation, which are reasons that actively explain why the motion or the policy in consideration is problematic or beneficial, as opposed to defensive argumentation that merely mitigate, that is, explain why the problems identified by an opponent are not as bad. So for example, since BP is a format where you have 4 teams, opposition in general can just get away simply by identifying mechanistic quibbles or saying, oh, the benefit identified by CG is not that great, or the harm identified by OG is not that bad. They also have an obligation to explain actively why the motion that is being debated is going to make the world a worse place or the status quo a worse world, or why the motion would actively make the world a better place. Second thing, in BP, since there are opening teams and closing teams, questions sometimes arise as to how do opening teams directly engage with closing teams. There are 3 ways. One is direct rebuttal, and this is fair game regardless of whether or not a team flags it as rebuttal in their speech. As a judge, you should still identify it if responses are being made. Second, offering points of information. The benefit of the doubt in general will be in favor of opening teams when adjudicating closed diagonal calls and closing teams don't accept POIs. What this means is, say for example, in the debate you just judged, there is a close call between the long diagonal, that is opening government and closing opposition. In that debate, if closing opposition refused to accept any point of information by opening government, even though they were reasonably offered plenty, then in general, the benefit of the doubt would be in favor of OG. Third form of engagement is sometimes opening teams will build robust cases that are implicitly responsive to a closing team's material. As a judge, you should also identify it as such and then be able to reasonably extrapolate what the implicit responses would be from the case that's already made from an opening team. The last thing to say is counterplans. Much of this has already been covered in Johanna's video regarding types of motions, so particularly in terms of symmetric fiat power and mutual exclusivity. But what I will add over here is that there may be certain formats where teams come with prepared cases. However, in BP, you don't have prepared cases, you have a motion, and teams have the obligation to debate the motion that has been given to them. So counter plans may not be as common in BP as in other formats. However, it's also important to understand that if an opposition team doesn't mention any counter plan, then it is generally assumed that they are in favor of the status quo. Cool. So thank you for watching. Hopefully that clarifies any misconceptions regarding BP as a format. If you have any questions, please contact David, Noam, or myself, or send us an email at the email address given in the description.